Greetings. Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on the modern papacy with the next installment on the reign of Pope Saint Paul VI. We left off last time with he opened the third period of the Council, Second Vatican Council, on September 14th, 1964. He introduced another striking innovation at this Mass of the concelebration of the opening Mass, celebrating around the papal altar with 24 other prelates from 19 different countries. So yet another public declaration of his commitment to the ecclesiology of openness to change and openness to the modern world. The third period of the council, and remember about the period, the third time when all the council fathers were physically together in St. Peter's. It was extended from September 14th, 1964, through November 21st, 1964. And it produced 3 documents. Third period produced 3 documents. On September 23rd, 1964, a draft of the document titled Declaration on Religious Freedom was introduced by Bishop Desmet. That's D-E-S-M-E-T, at the Archbishop of Rouen. At this point, that document on religious liberty became separate from what would become a separate document, the Decree on Ecumenism. Since Christianity was legalized in antiquity by act of a Roman emperor, Constantine I, in 313 A.D., the Church has sought security from the top down. Convert the ruler, and then the rest becomes easier. This attitude accounts for the Church's complete, well, in part, it's not the only reason, but in part, it accounts for the Church's complete integration into the medieval structure of feudalism. That began to fragment with the Protestant movement, culminating in the creation of confessional states, as they say, at the Peace of Augsburg, 1555, in which it was agreed by all concerned, this was specifically in Germany, that it was agreed that in Germany, which was divided religiously at this point between Catholic and Protestant, that the religion of the ruler would determine the religion of his territory. Even that clarity further crumbled with the creation of the secular state, such as the United States, the French Revolutionary, republics, as they called it, which was followed by even more frightening ideological states, that's the Nazis and the communists. The American Jesuit John Courtney Murray, whom we've met previously, accepted that the reality, that the Catholic monarchies were not coming back. And living in a constitutionally secular republic, as he did, in the United States, revived the proposition of 19th century liberal Catholicism, which we encountered in the reign of Pope Gregory XVI. The proposition that the Church could actually flourish if separated from the state, as it was in the United States. That it could flourish more, actually, than it had when it was under the control of the medieval monarchs. Granted, the Church in that situation had the security of financial patronage from the monarch, from the state, but correlatively, government money always comes complete with collar and leash. But for this to work, the Church's public expression of its own ecclesiology must embrace religious freedom for everyone, for those who are not Catholic also, must embrace it as worthy and good in itself. Murray's publications working out these ideas from 1951 on led to his being silenced in 1955. But then, as we saw, he was lifted out of the abyss, the academic abyss, by Cardinal Spellman, the Archbishop of New York, who brought him to the council as his peritus. So the debates on this, the religious freedom, followed the patterns of the other documents. Dismay articulated the affirmative with a discourse on human dignity requiring human freedom requiring and including conscience, freedom of conscience, liberty of conscience. Whereas Cardinal Ruffini, speaking as an apologist in the Baroque tradition, insisted that there is only one true religion, so that true liberty is fulfilled only when that one true religion is embraced. He regarded the document, the draft, as it had reached that point, as consisting only of vague platitudes that could only lead to confusion and indifferentism. So it went on like this for 44 speeches and dozens of written responses for the record. It appeared that the draft would not receive the 2/3 vote necessary to proceed. So Cardinal Bea, we met him, the Jesuit cardinal, he went to Paul VI privately. Ottaviani, started joking, calling Bea the Gazelle for his habit of running to the Pope whenever he did not get his way. But it worked. On September 28, 1964, Pope Paul intervened in the council to send the draft on religious liberty forward, the next step in the process to becoming a document, based on the speeches and written comments he reviewed, without putting it to a vote. So he intervened to bypass the vote and just said, yes, it's going forward. So once again, the traditionalists say, okay, you want to appear democratic and have voting and collegiality when you have enough votes for the bishops to do what you want, enough votes of the bishops to do what you want. But then if the votes are not going to go your way, well, then you just dispense with the voting and just by fiat move it, forward. September 28th, 1964, discussion opened on the draft of what was at that point named the Declaration on the Jews and Non-Christian Religions. It was introduced by Cardinal Bea. This had originated in a specific assignment given by Pope John XXIII to Cardinal Bea in September of 1960. After John had what he described as a very moving personal encounter with a Jewish scholar named Jules Isaac. Isaac had given the Pope a 10-point list of how other churches could remedy their anti-Semitism. Prominent again in everyone's mind because of World War II was still so fresh in everyone's memory. And that list included that list was created by an international Jewish conference in Switzerland in 1947 as part of the processing the lessons of the Holocaust and trying to secure international commitment to, never again. One obstacle to a positive statement on the Jews in 1964 was the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, followed by Israel winning 2 wars up to that point in the council. So we're up to 1964. So by that point, Israel had won 2 wars, one in 1948 and another in 1954, against surrounding Arab countries, which regarded the Jews as a foreign occupation force, oppressing their Palestinian Islamic Arab brothers. Eastern Rite Christians feared that a theological statement of openness and tolerance for Jews would be regarded as a political statement in favor of what Arab Muslims regarded as the Jewish theft of Palestine. And as a second or a third order effect, that angry Islamic governments would retaliate against Christian minorities in their regions, which for the most part, those were Eastern Rite Christian minorities. Or Eastern Orthodox, but still Christian. Whether or not they were in union with Rome, they were still Christian churches. Cardinal Bea's solution to this was to guarantee the theological and non-political impact of the proposed document by treating the Jews in the same text, in the same document, with church relations to other non-Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, etc. In his introduction to the draft, Cardinal Bea specified that this was not to be regarded as a comment on the political movement of Zionism, which pursued, creation of the State of Israel, but rather was a moral requirement to specifically absolve the Jews of the day and the Jewish people of the first century of the charge of deicide, that the Jews had killed God, had killed Christ. Whereas a more nuanced and historically and biblically grounded statement would be that only a certain number of Jewish and Roman leaders were directly involved in the conspiracy and were implicated in the death of Jesus. And their souls had long ago received their judgment from God. And what that judgment is, we cannot know. Cardinal Ruffini responded that the only proper statement of a church council regarding the Jews would be prayers that the veil be removed from their eyes and they see that Jesus was the fulfillment of messianic prophecy. As for accusations of historic anti-Semitism, Ruffini rebutted by pointing to the thousands of Jews saved by priests during the war, for which they were specially thanked by the chief rabbi of Rome. As for other non-Christian religions, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Ruffini stated that a council can do nothing other than acknowledge that they exist and pray that they also come to the truth. Ruffini was joined by many others in this argument, this line of reasoning, numerically more than usual. I mean, obviously, Ottaviani, Lefebvre, Siri, they all joined it, but there were more than those few, than those usuals. So as the momentum developed, there became serious talk of eliminating the document altogether as a separate document. For various reasons, both not only because of Ruffini's arguments, but also because of concerns that no matter how it's phrased, that it would be regarded as a political statement on events of the day. So some say, okay, let's not have a separate document on it and just simply insert a paragraph in Lumen Gentium, in the document on the church, offering prayers for all non-Christians in the world. As Ottaviani predicted, Cardinal Bea went into gazelle mode when it looked like he was not going to get his way. And he went to the Pope privately on October 10th. For the first time that Bea had done this, both with Paul and John the 23rd, Paul was not persuaded. As remember, he had been a diplomat. He spent, his decades as a diplomat. And so he also was concerned about the political implications of this. Choosing that this would be regarded as the church siding politically with the nation of Israel, and that other Islamic countries with substantial Christian minorities would take it out on them, would punish them. So the next day, Cardinal Bea assembled 14 other cardinals, including those we've met of his mindset, the progressive mindset, Cardinal Fring of Cologne, Cardinal Koenig of Vienna, Cardinal Sunens of Brussels, Belgium, Cardinal Elfrink of Utrecht. And they all went to Paul, and that worked. So Paul intervened in the council once again to move the draft forward to a further revision, to move it, to just intervene and move the document by his command to the next step of the process without putting it to a vote of the council. And so in the next round, this would be titled the Decree on Non-Christian Religions. September 30th, 1964. The revised schema on divine revelation, remember that? That was reintroduced. The arguments were a repetition of the fight 2 years earlier. The issues were inerrancy of the Scripture, of the Bible, and the relationship of Scripture and tradition. Were they two separate sources of revelation, or was there only one source of revelation that is accessed in two ways? Or, as another way of phrasing it, I'll leave it at that until we get to the document. So it went on and on and on like this. It was very painful, very, very draining conflicts for all involved. Until October 6th, Pope Paul intervened again and just simply instructed that the text move forward to the next stage in the process without putting it to a vote. So you see how the traditionalists feel like, that every time it looks like the vote's not going to go their way, not going to go the way of the progressives, then Paul just intervenes and just ignores the vote and moves it forward anyway. So that's like Ottaviani said in a previous address. To us, it just seems like the decisions are already made. You've already decided what documents you want and what you want them to say. And if it looks like the vote is going to go against that, then you just move it anyway. But, the Pope can do that. Like the Pope could have promulgated all of these documents on his own without a council. I mean, that's the Catholic Church is not a democracy, especially in terms of teaching. And no one ever claimed it was. So, that's ecclesiastical life. October 6, 1964. Cardinal Fernando Cento, Cento. He was a member of the diplomatic corps, former papal nuncio to Belgium, president of the Conciliar Commission on the Laity. He introduced the draft schema, the draft outline, for a document on the lay apostolate, highlighting the many works of lay groups, such as the St. Vincent de Paul Society, the Holy Name Society, the Sodality of Our Lady, the Knights of Columbus, etc. Cardinal Michael Brown, he was Irish, Dominican Master General, and in this hierarchy, he was the Vice Prefect of the Doctrinal Commission, former rector of the Angelicum, the Dominican University in Rome. He pointed out that the draft did not mention that the laity were obliged to obey their parish priest in the ministry, which he characterized as a grave omission. Still, controversy on this document was minimal compared to the previous ones, so the draft moved forward on October 13th without a formal vote, but not because Paul intervened, just because there was a motion to move it forward without a vote, and there were no objections, so it did. Same day, October 13th, 1964, Francois Marty, Marty, the Archbishop of Reims in France, introduced the draft schema outline of the document that would become On the Life and Ministry of Priests. This was followed by 40 speeches, which did not contest any of the content of the document, but did point out that the document should be longer and more detailed, as at that point it was shorter than the document on non-Christian religions. So that recommendation was accepted, and the draft was sent for revision and expansion on October 15th. Same day, October 15th, 1964, a draft schema, an outline, working outline, on Eastern Catholic churches were taken up, meaning those Eastern rites that are in union with Rome. Eastern prelates, led by Maximus IV, the Melkite Patriarch of Antioch, who refused to address the council in Latin, but only in French, insisted that the document recognize that the Church cannot be identified as being coterminous with the Latin rite, that the Eastern tradition of collegiality must be respected, and that Eastern rites must never be forced to conform to Latin usage. After 2 days of speeches, this was moved forward for polishing of the text without further incident. October 20th, 1964. Schema number 13, which would end up being Gaudium et Spes on the Church in the Modern World, was addressed by Cardinal Leinart of Lille, France, and we've already met. Cardinal Ruffini responded with his usual critique that essential terms like church and world were used in the draft without precise definitions, leaving the meaning ambiguous and ambivalent. For a change, a surprise, he was joined by Cardinal Fring of Cologne. Usually was on the other side, but in this case, Fring was persuaded by his Peritus, none other than Joseph Ratzinger, future Pope Benedict XVI. At the time, he was a professor at Bonn and then at Munster. He pointed out that the hopeful tone of the document was built on an incarnational anthropology, without sufficient emphasis on the soteriology of the cross. This, he concluded, left the draft unbalanced, without an appreciation of sin, the necessity of sacrifice in the real world, in everyday life. Cardinal Siri wanted a specific and detailed condemnation of atheistic communism. Bishop Gerard Coderre of Quebec, that's Codere. I think this is the first time we met him. He called for a detailed section promoting the rights and dignity of women. Cardinal Alfrink, who we've met a number of times, wanted a specific condemnation of the nuclear arms race. Remember how recent, from their perspective, the Cuban Missile Crisis was, and the World War III almost happened. And for locals, both those Maryland friends that watch this, as well as those from New Orleans, the guy who was attending the council at that point as Auxiliary Bishop of Washington, D.C., Philip Matthew Hannon, later Archbishop of New Orleans, argued that possession of nuclear weapons by free countries was essential, as long as non-free societies possessed nuclear weapons. And he was seconded in this by Archbishop George Beck of Liverpool, England. Ruffini, Ottaviani, and Brown wanted, in addition, more precision in the document on marriage. Specifically, the precision they wanted is they wanted the document to condemn artificial contraception, and they wanted the document to enumerate the ends of the sacrament of matrimony as being procreation and as a remedy for concupiscence. Cardinal Sunens responded that the grace of matrimony existed in the supernatural order, and that was beyond change. Yet the practice of marriage exists in time, evolves through history, influenced heavily by cultural practices. Meaning, he continued, that it might be healthy and liberating for marriage to take account, or for the Church's statement on marriage, to take account of the depressing needs in parts of the world afflicted by starvation, complicated by overpopulation. So that was a very, very careful way of suggesting that maybe a blanket condemnation of artificial contraception should not be in the document. On October 23rd, 1964, Paul VI informed the council that the matter of birth control was no longer to be debated by them. That he's going to take care of that himself. He reminded them 2 more times of that they were not to debate that. 2 more times before October 29th. For the first time, Paul ordered Cardinal Sunens to issue a public retraction of that statement I summarized him making, that perhaps because of starvation complicated by overpopulation, he ordered Sunens to make a public retraction of that. Because, of course, it was interpreted as Sunens, not only a cardinal, but one of the 4 moderators of the council, supporting artificial contraception. Which, to be fair to him, I don't know whether he did or not. I can't read minds. But in reading what he actually said, and for the sake of time, because these speeches went on and on and on, so I'm not quoting all of them. He was in his statement. He was just saying a condemnation should not be put in that document. So he was not saying he supported it. Now maybe I don't know. I'm just saying, just to be accurate. But Sunens did. He did issue a retraction on November 7th, stating that he affirmed that the decision on the matter of what the Church would say about artificial contraception rests in the hands of the supreme magisterium of the Church. November 6th, 1964, the draft schema of a document on missionary activity was introduced. After 3 days, uneventful, the draft was sent back to the commission just for some polishing, but no substantive theological objections were voiced. November 10th, 1964, a draft schema of a document on religious orders moved forward to polishing and expansion of the document with reference to the aggiornamento and the ressourcement. And eventually this would be the document Perfecti Caritatis. November 12th, 1964, a schema for another document on the priesthood was introduced. Eventually this was Optatum Totius. November 16th, 1964, Paul VI intervened again to postpone again a vote on the second revised draft of the document on religious liberty. The assumption was that informal canvassing, revealed that too many bishops would vote against it, which would mean closing the session with an embarrassment. At least, those who favored it would regard it as an embarrassment. Those against it would regard it as good, as a positive victory. On November 21st, 1964, which happened to be a Saturday, the third session of the council ended with votes in favor of the drafts of the documents on the Church, Lumen Gentium, on the Oriental churches, meaning the Eastern churches, that's Orientalium Ecclesiarum, and the document on ecumenism, Unitatis Reindengratio. I can't make my mouth do that. Which leads to the third document actually approved by the council and promulgated was the Dogmatic Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, Light to the Nations, November 21st, 1964, consisting of 69 numbered sections. In favor, 2,151. against 5. And the usuals. Ottaviani, Lefebvre, Ruffini, Siri, and Brown. The traditional doctrinal discussion of the Church, ecclesiology of the Church, had always been, according to, at least for 18 centuries, had been according to the 4 marks of the Church, 17 centuries, which we say in the Creed: 1, holy, Catholic, apostolic. Lumen Gentium did not in any way reject that understanding, but by its emphasis and internal logic, the document focused on the Church as the people of God. Capitalized people of God as a proper term. So the logic being, God created the world, meaning that even though sin exists within the hearts of those who choose it in the world itself is not ontologically evil. Ontos means being, so the world is not by the nature of its being evil. As a result, the Church need have no reluctance to seek means of involvement in the world for the purpose of sanctifying it and renewing it with the Gospels, renewing the wounds caused by sin with the healing of the Gospel and the sacraments. Because the Gospel is the Word of God, it is the light from God, unsullied by the sinfulness of humanity. This makes Christ and the Gospel that Christ revealed the light to the nations, the Lumen Gentium. The Church is the creation of Christ. And this assertion is biblically based, recorded in the Gospel and the New Testament. In bringing the light of Christ to the nations, the Church created by Christ itself functions as a light to the nations in the form of the mystical body of Christ. That's in number 8, section number 8 of the document. The model of the Church's interaction with the world must be St. Paul, who did not fear to venture into the pagan environment of the Roman Empire of his time and fearlessly proclaimed the gospel, even though it meant great suffering and personal hardship for him, including unjustly being deprived of his freedom and life. Eventually he was beheaded. So this a sample of this reasoning can be found in section number 13 of Lumen Gentium. Perhaps the most controversial chapter of the document is the final one, on the Blessed Mother. It had been Ottaviani's wish, and those with him, Ruffini, Siri, Lefebvre, that a separate document on the Blessed Mother be presented by the Council. But once again, he was outmaneuvered by those self-identified as progressive who wanted Mary treated within the context of the Church, rather than separated into a parallel document. Their argument being that Mariology, the theology of Our Lady, is not something separate from the Church, but rather it is an integral part of the Church because Jesus received his human nature from Mary. And so the redemption that Jesus accomplished as true God and true man, that was only possible because of Mary. So therefore, she is a constituent, integral part of the Church's theology and should not be a separate document. Despite this, and also, the traditionalists were aggravated that first they lost on that they didn't get a separate document, but also that treating her as the final chapter. Despite this, the chapter on Mary does not in any way change any Church teaching regarding Mary as the Mother of God, the Mother of the Church, the Immaculate Conception, the Assumption. Document number 4 of the ultimate 16 total is the decree on Eastern Catholic churches, Orientalium Ecclesiarum, which just means Eastern churches. Now, that means Eastern Rite Catholic churches. That means the Eastern Rite, those that are in union with Rome, November 21st, 1964, consists of 30 numbered sections. Votes in favor, 2,110. Votes against, 39. So more than the usual 4 or 5. This was directed to the Uniate churches. At issue was the fear of Eastern Rite Catholics that their liturgical tradition would be absorbed, would just be erased and replaced by the Latin liturgical tradition. So as a means of reassuring them, as well as offering commensurate assurance to the Orthodox, those the Eastern Christian churches that were not in communion with Rome, and they're going to get a document too, but just to reassure them of the ecumenical character of the council. So this decree specified a couple of examples. An excerpt from number 5, quote, "It," meaning the council, "solemnly declares that the churches of the East, as much as those of the West, have a full right and are in duty bound to rule themselves, each in accordance with its own established disciplines. Since all these are praiseworthy by reason of their venerable antiquity, more harmonious with the character of their faithful, and more suited to the promotion of the good of souls." Section 6. All members of the Eastern Rite should know and be convinced that they can and should always preserve their legitimate liturgical rite and their established way of life, and that these may not be altered except to obtain for themselves an organic improvement. So, seminarians, this is one reason why there's a separate code of canon law. You have the code for the Latin Rite, and you have the code for the Eastern Rite churches. Document number 5, the Decree on Ecumenism, Unitatis Reintegratio, which just means restoring unity. Now this is addressed to the Orthodox, those Eastern Catholic churches that are not in communion with Rome. Same date, November 21st, 1964, consisting of 24 numbered sections. In favor, 2,137. Against, 11. Pursuit of reunification to heal the rift opened in the year 1054, which we covered in the medieval course. That was nothing new. I mean, the attempts to end this was nothing new. Official reunification actually did occur at the Council of Florence in 1439, but it was never realized because the faithful in the East rejected it out of mistrust of the Latins in the West, owing in part, at least, to the sack of Constantinople by troops ostensibly collected to go on the Fourth Crusade. And that was followed by imposition of feudalism, and the Greeks, of a Latin kingdom in Constantinople from 1204 to 1264. And we covered that also in the medieval course. So this decree clarifies what ecumenism is and how it was to be pursued with the Orthodox. So a definition of ecumenism, section number 4. The term ecumenical movement indicates the initiatives and activities planned and undertaken according to the various needs of the Church and as opportunities offer to promote Christian unity. In addition, the way is prepared for cooperation between them in the duties for the common good of humanity, which are demanded by every Christian conscience. And wherever this is allowed, there is prayer in common. Skipping down, section number 20, on Protestants, how ecumenism relates to Protestants. An excerpt, quote, "But we rejoice to see that our separated brethren," so using that term from John the 23rd, "look to Christ as the source and center of church unity. Their longing for union with Christ inspires them to seek an ever closer unity, and also to bear witness to their faith among the peoples of the earth. So the third period of the council ended with this on November 21st, 1964. Paul VI announced Mary as Mother of the Church and announced promulgation of the documents on the Church, on the Catholic Eastern Churches, and on ecumenism. During the intercession recess, Paul VI did it again. He once again made a dramatic gesture of openness to the world. From December 2nd through December 5th, 1964, he went to Bombay, India. India, of course, being a majority non-Christian nation, majority Hindu, but also with a Muslim population. He went there to attend an international Eucharistic Congress. This accomplished three objectives. First, it was another example of the Pope implementing the Council's declared openness to modern means of communication, as this trip required plane travel and was televised and carried over the radio. Second, it affirmed by papal action the openness to non-Christians declared by the ecumenical documents produced in the previous session. Third, by attending a Eucharistic Congress, which was an act of traditional Catholic devotion, Paul was offering assurances to the faithful, especially the conservatives, the traditionalists, that he was not abandoning church teaching on the real presence to satisfy non-Catholics. To make this same point, Paul VI issued an encyclical during the recess, re-emphasizing traditional Catholic doctrine on the real presence. This is the encyclical Mysterium Fidei, September 3rd, 1965. And this follows the precedent set by John the 23rd of an exercising papal teaching authority while the council was still open. So this Mysterium Fidei is used in the Catechism. For example, in number 1183, the tabernacle is to be situated in churches in a worthy place, quote, that's the phrase, in a worthy place, with the greatest honor, to foster adoration before the Lord, really present in the Blessed Sacrament. So that refers to Mysterium Fidei, number 66. Catechism number 1374 affirms traditional dogma on the Eucharist, that the body, blood, soul, and divinity is truly, really, substantially present. That refers to Mysterium Fidei, number 39. Catechism number 1378 affirms the tradition of adoration of the Blessed Sacrament outside of Mass by reserving the consecrated host and exposing it for veneration and processions. Refers to Mysterium Fidei, number 56. And Catechism number 1381 refers to the real presence of the body and blood, that it cannot be apprehended by the senses, but only by faith. Referring to Mysterium Fidei 18. 11 days later, the fourth and final period of Vatican II opened, September 14th, 1965, on which date Paul VI announced another trip, a forthcoming trip to the United Nations, which by that point, originally it was in London, but by that point, 65, it was in the United States, in New York. Second, he announced the establishment of the Synod of Bishops with a motu proprio, Apostolica Solicitudo, dated on that date, September 14th, 1965. So the fourth period of the council extended from September 14th to December 8th, 1965. When he opened the fourth and final period, as I said, he announced the creation of the Synod of Bishops. So what is this? This would, he explained, provide for the regular meeting of the Pope with representatives of the national conferences of bishops from all the nations of the world. And that would presumably be a more functional number than trying to meet with all the bishops of the world at one time, as at the council. Now, Paul did not explain the background for this. But, we know in retrospect that he had taken off the agenda of the council discussion of artificial contraception and priestly celibacy, that he would produce teachings on the matter. Another element of the background is that there are many bishops who wanted the council to continue sitting longer to address those issues. And there's some who wanted the council to remain a permanent sitting body, like a parliament for the church. Now, this would be erroneous ecclesiology, as councils were never permanent bodies, and the suggestion reeked of the heresy of conciliarism, which we covered in the medieval course. Now, in fairness, none of the bishops ever went so far as to publicly argue that the council should continue sitting without the Pope's approval. I don't know, some of them might have believed that, but I'm not aware of any public statements that any of them made to that effect. The Synod of Bishops represented Paul's compromise. It enabled him to bring the council to a close, and it allowed the bishops an ongoing voice in articulation of magisterial teaching. And the synods still meet. The practice, they still meet on a regular basis. September 15th, 1965, Bishop Dismay reintroduced the multiply revised draft on religious liberty. Debate followed the exact same pattern as the previous times, with that rift between self-identified progressives and traditionalists. September 21st, 1965. The draft Declaration on Religious Liberty was finally approved by the needed two-thirds majority. While the council was in session, but before this period produced any documents, Paul VI made another dramatic gesture of openness to the modern world. On October 4th, 1965, he became the first pope to address the United Nations in New York, and the first pope to visit the United States as pope. This address was televised. You can find it on YouTube. So once more, Paul made a practical demonstration of using modern means of communication. Further layers of significance. The United Nations was an entirely secular organization, which came into being when the First Nations signed the Charter on June 26, 1945, in the month following the surrender of Nazi Germany on May 8th, and 2 months before we, the United States, dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, August 6th and August 9th, and then Japan surrendered on August 14th, 1945. The previous attempt at this, at an international, discussion body for the sake of promoting peace, was the League of Nations, created after the First World War. The League of Nations voted to dissolve itself and turn over its assets to the United Nations in order to promote world peace. The first post-war General Session met in London on January 7th, 1946. The same year, a wealthy American, John D. Rockefeller, donated $8.5 million, which was a lot of money in 1946, for the UN to build a permanent headquarters for the United Nations in New York. Now, Paul VI had already demonstrated his willingness to reach out to non-Christians. He had gone to the State of Israel, had gone to the nation of India, and had done so in front of televised cameras. With this address, he offered the same proof in reaching out to an organization that not only included secular governments, but included some of those governments were overtly anti-religious. such as the Soviet Union, and which actively persecuted the church. The substance of his address was a generalized plea for world peace as being in the interest of the common good. This statement not only provided proof of openness, but also offered a basis for cooperation in interest of the common good apart from doctrinal or ontological differences. Now, as we'll see, as time passed, it turned out that the secular world was not as open as Paul and some of the more optimistic of the Council Fathers thought it would be. They were thinking, well, all we have to do is change the language. If we stop condemning, and then the world will realize that we want to help. October 11th, 1964. Paul VI once again had to forbid the council from discussing priestly celibacy as possibly becoming optional. October 14th, 1965, the final draft of the Declaration on Non-Christian religions was approved. Document number 6, the Decree on the Pastoral Office of the Bishops in the Church. Christus Dominus. October 28, 1965. 4 numbered sections. Votes in favor, 2,319. Votes against, 2. At issue was a question of sacramentology. One position held that bishops were simply priests who had been given special duties and privileges by the Pope. This view was buttressed by the development over the centuries of numerous types of prelates, such as the monsignors, and many titular bishops who were ordained as bishops, had the vestments of bishops, the title of bishops, in the curia and the diplomatic corps, but which did not have a diocese and did not have care of souls. In the end, the council's articulation was in favor of the other position regarding bishops, that bishops have the fullness of the high priesthood of the new covenant as successors of the apostles. A summary example, section number 4, quote, by virtue of sacramental consecration and hierarchical communion with the head and members of the college, bishops are constituted as members of the episcopal body. The order of bishops is the successor to the college of the apostles in teaching and pastoral direction. Or rather, in the episcopal order, the apostolic body continues without a break, together with its head, the Roman pontiff, and never without this head. It exists as the subject of supreme plenary power over the universal church. But this power cannot be exercised except with the agreement of the Roman pontiff. Document number 7, a decree on the renewal of religious life, meaning religious orders. Perfecti caritatis. Perfect charity is what that means. Voted October 28, 1965, 25 numbered sections. In favor, 2,321. Against, 4. A couple of excerpts. Number 2. The adaptation and renewal of the religious life includes both the constant return to the sources of all Christian life and to the original spirit of the institutes and their adaptation to the changed conditions of our time. This renewal, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and the guidance of the Church. Another excerpt from number 3. Therefore, let constitutions, directories, custom books, books of prayer, and ceremonies, and such like, be suitably re-edited, and obsolete laws suppressed, be adapted to the decrees of this sacred synod. Religious orders. Unlike bishops, priests, and deacons, religious orders do not have a biblical foundation for their existence. Like there's no biblical passage in which Jesus created a religious order. Rather, they come about by approval of proper church authorities. Bishops in the case of diocesan congregations, the Holy Father in the case of orders open for the universal church. Such institutes practice a particular charism needed by the church to a higher and in a more focused way than is possible for other clergy and laity. So the call of this document for religious orders to renew themselves by examining their origins compared to their practices at the time, in light of their charism, was well-intentioned. The call was well-intentioned, but as implemented after the council, resulted in the disintegration of many, many, many religious orders. So again, this must be taken in context. The plummeting in vocations, not only to religious orders, but to holy orders as well, was largely a phenomenon in Western Europe and the United States. By way of contrast, in the same time period, the vocation of marriage underwent similar evacuation. As divorce laws were made, divorce was made easier, legally was made easier. Then people were fleeing married life too. I mean, they say half of marriages end in divorce. Now that's a statistic. Well, anyway, I don't want to. Yeah. Okay. Decree number 8 on the decree on the training of priests, Optatum Totius. October 28th, 1965. 21 numbered sections. In favor, 2,318. Against, 3. The existing mode of priestly formation at the time dated from the final period of the Council of Trent, which we covered earlier in the course, Session 23, July 15th, 1563, on holy orders. And this is the Reformed Decree, Canon 18. In continuity with the prevailing post-French Revolution concern that the Church had been quarantined from the modern world, and in keeping with the theology of bishops as articulated in the same session of Vatican II, this decree called for tailoring priestly training to local circumstances and needs. Example excerpt from number 1. A special program of priestly training is to be undertaken by each country or rite. It must be set up by the episcopal conferences, revised from time to time, and approved by the Apostolic See. Skipping down, an excerpt from number 15, quote, "The philosophical disciplines are to be taught in such a way that the students are first of all led to acquire a solid and coherent knowledge of man, the world, and of God, relying on a philosophical patrimony which is perennially valid and taking into account the philosophical investigations of later ages. This is especially true of those investigations which exercise a greater influence in their own nations. Accounts should also be taken of the more recent progress of the sciences. The net result should be that the students, correctly understanding the characteristics of the contemporary mind, will be duly prepared for dialogue with the men of their time." From number 16, quote, "The theological disciplines, in the light of faith and under the guidance of the magisterium of the Church, should be taught that the students will correctly draw out Catholic doctrine from divine revelation, profoundly penetrate it, make it the food of their own spiritual lives, and be enabled to proclaim, explain, and protect it in their priestly ministry. The students are to be formed with particular care in the study of the Bible, which ought to be, as it were, the soul of all theology. After a suitable introduction, they are to be initiated carefully into the method of exegesis, and they are to see the great themes of divine revelation, and to receive from their daily reading of and meditating on the sacred books inspiration and nourishment. Dogmatic theology should be so arranged that these biblical themes are proposed first of all. Next, there should be opened up to the students what the fathers of the Eastern and Western Church have contributed to the faithful transmission and development of the individual truths of revelation. So I'll intervene here, seminarians. This is why. This is the Patristic course. You remember that? It's years and years earlier. The very first course you had with me? Well, right there. Back to the quote. The further history of dogma should also be presented, account being taken of its relation to the general history of the Church. Go team. Next, in order that they may illumine the mysteries of salvation as completely as possible, the students should learn to penetrate them more deeply with the help of speculation, under the guidance of St. Thomas Aquinas, whom we covered in the medieval course, and to perceive their interconnections. They should be taught to recognize these same mysteries as present and working in liturgical actions and in the entire life of the Church. They should learn to seek the solutions to human problems under the light of revelation, to apply the eternal truths of revelation to the changeable conditions of human affairs, and to communicate them in a way suited to men of our own day. Likewise, let the other theological disciplines be renewed through a more living contact with the mystery of Christ and the history of salvation. Special care must be given to the perfecting of moral theology. The circumstances of various regions being duly considered, students are to be brought to a fuller understanding of the churches and ecclesial communities separated from the Apostolic Roman See, so that they may be able to contribute to the work of reestablishing unity among all Christians according to the prescriptions of this Holy Synod. All right, skipping down. All right, you get the point. Okay, document number 9, Declaration on Christian Education. Gravissimum Educationis, October 28th, 1965. 12 numbered sections. In favor, 2,290. Against, 35. Now we've seen persistent earlier in earlier courses, especially in the this is your third year. So next year in the fourth year course, we'll see it more in the American history course. Persistent attacks by secular powers against the right of Catholic schools to exist, to the point that some nations actually forcibly closed the schools and stole the school property and outlawed religious orders. We saw that happen with the Jesuits before the French Revolution, and of course to all of them during the French Revolution. Since Vatican II was preeminently concerned with articulating the place of the Church in the modern world, it was necessary that this be clarified. There were those who questioned whether or not the Church should still have Catholic schools, arguing it would be a much stronger gesture of support to modernity if the Church closed the schools so that Catholics would not be perceived as separatist. In this case, though, the Council did not make a concession to modernity. Instead, it did defend the right of Catholic schools to exist, teaching that they did have an intrinsic importance in the world. Excerpt from number 3. Quote, "The duty of educating belongs to the Church, not merely because she must recognize as a human society capable of educating, but especially because she has the responsibility I have evening mass, so I gotta, hopefully let's see. Will I finish this? Let's see. No, I don't think there's any way I'm going to finish it before. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop here because I have evening mass, but we do confessions before mass, so I got to get ready for that. So I'll pause here, and then after mass, I should be able to finish. If not tonight, then tomorrow, and upload them all. And this will complete the course. So, seminarians, for a 3-credit course, which you're taking, the accreditation requirements are for 45 hours, 45 class hours. So we've already passed. Actually, we're going to end up being past 45 hours once I finish Paul VI. So so that'll conclude the course. So the next one I will be able to finish. So for the moment, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.